Most people have no idea that their food could be crawling with worms, and I'm going to show you how to spot the signs. When we think of food contamination, we often think of bacteria, viruses, or pesticides, but the reality is that worms can be lurking in our food too. It's a pressing issue that affects millions of people worldwide, and it's not just a third world problem. Food contaminated with worms can be found in supermarkets, restaurants, and even in our own kitchens. It's a nightmare that can have serious health consequences if left unchecked. The thought of consuming worms might make your skin crawl, but the truth is that many of us have probably eaten food contaminated with worms at some point in our lives. It's a hard pill to swallow, but it's essential to acknowledge the reality of this issue. The problem is so widespread that even food safety authorities have trouble keeping track of it. It's a complex issue that requires a multifaceted approach, but the first step is to raise awareness and educate ourselves about the risks. Food contamination is already a significant concern, and when you add worms to the mix, it becomes even more alarming. The lack of transparency in the food industry only exacerbates the problem. As consumers, we have the right to know what we're eating, and it's unacceptable that we're often left in the dark about the safety of our food. We need to take responsibility for our health and demand better from the food industry. The more we learn about food contamination, the more we realize how crucial it is to take control of our food choices. We can't rely solely on food safety authorities to protect us. We need to be proactive in protecting our health. By understanding the risks of worm-infested food, we can take steps to minimize our exposure and demand better from the companies that produce and sell our food. Worms can be found in a wide range of foods, from fruits and vegetables to meat and processed products. According to the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations, up to 25% of the world's food crops are lost to pests and diseases, including worms. In the United States alone, the FDA estimates that around 48 million people get sick from foodborne illnesses each year, many of which are caused by worm-infested food. The prevalence of worm-contaminated food is staggering. In one study, researchers found that over 30% of samples of fresh herbs were contaminated with parasites, including worms. Another study found that nearly 20% of pork products contained worm larvae. The risks are real, and they're not limited to developing countries. We can find worm-contaminated food in our local supermarkets, and it's often difficult to detect. Food contaminated with worms can pose serious health risks, including intestinal blockages, malnutrition, and even organ damage. In severe cases, it can lead to life-threatening conditions. The problem is further complicated by the fact that many people who consume worm-contaminated food may not show immediate symptoms. It can take weeks, months, or even years for the effects to manifest, making it challenging to trace the source of the contamination. The risks are particularly high for vulnerable populations, such as pregnant women, children, and people with weakened immune systems. For these groups, consuming worm-contaminated food can have devastating consequences. It's essential that we take the necessary precautions to minimize the risks and ensure that our food is safe to eat. There are several types of worms that can contaminate food, each with its unique characteristics and risks. The most common types include roundworms, tapeworms, and hookworms. These worms can be found in a wide range of foods, from raw fruits and vegetables to processed meats and dairy products. Understanding the different types of worms and how they contaminate food is crucial in reducing the risks. Roundworms, for example, are one of the most common types of worms found in food. They can range in size from a few millimeters to several centimeters and can be found in foods such as fruits, vegetables, and nuts. Tapeworms, on the other hand, are long, flat worms that can grow up to several meters in length. They're often found in undercooked meat, particularly pork and wild game. Hookworms are another common type of worm that can contaminate food. They're usually found in soil and can be ingested through contaminated fruits and vegetables. Hookworms can cause gastrointestinal problems, including diarrhea and abdominal pain, and can lead to malnutrition if left untreated. Identifying contaminated food can be challenging, but there are some warning signs to look out for. One of the most common signs is the presence of small, white specks or moving particles in the food. Worms can also cause unexpected textures, flavors, or odors in the food. In some cases, contaminated food may appear slimy, moldy, or discolored. When it comes to identifying contaminated food, it's essential to be vigilant and take the time to inspect the food carefully. Check for any signs of spoilage, mold, or unusual odors. If you're buying fruits and vegetables, make sure to wash them thoroughly before consuming them. Avoid eating raw or undercooked meat, particularly pork and wild game, as they're more likely to be contaminated with worms. One of the most compelling cases of worm-infested food is the story of a woman who contracted a severe parasitic infection after eating contaminated sushi. The woman, who remains anonymous, claimed that she had eaten at a reputable restaurant and had no idea that the fish was contaminated with worms. The incident left her with severe abdominal pain, nausea, and vomiting, and required extensive medical treatment. The case highlights the severity of the issue and the potential consequences of consuming contaminated food. It's a stark reminder that we need to be proactive in protecting our health and demanding better from the food industry. By sharing her story, we can raise awareness about the risks of worm-infested food and encourage others to take action. As we've seen, the risks of consuming food contaminated with worms are real and potentially life-threatening. It's essential that we take the necessary precautions to minimize the risks and ensure that our food is safe to eat. By being aware of the potential risks and taking the time to inspect our food, we can reduce the chances of getting sick. In conclusion, the issue of worm-infested food is a pressing concern that requires our attention. By educating ourselves about the risks and taking the necessary precautions, we can protect our health and demand better from the food industry. Remember, it's always better to be safe than sorry when it comes to the food we eat. Thank you for watching, and if you have any personal experiences or thoughts on food safety, please share them in the comments below. If you found this video helpful, like, subscribe, and click on the bell for more health tips and updates.